Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to our public forum and helping us to develop our housing production plan. Most of you know me, and I know most of you here, which is a nice thing. I'm Carla Ferroni, and I'm the housing coordinator. So tonight we're going to have a presentation by our housing consultant, Karen Sonnerborg, and she was hired by a grant through the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund with money from the Community Preservation Committee to complete this plan for us. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are on a little bit of a tight schedule because there's another group that's going to be coming into this room for 7 o'clock. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation, and then we're going to break up into smaller groups, and we'll be moving into 2 rooms over here on the other side of the hallway. And then we'll reconvene and put our heads together and vote on what we come up with for priorities. So I'm going to bring Karen up here now, and so that we can start the meeting.
Thanks, Carla. So can everybody hear me? Great, great. I don't know which is worse, having public forums when there's snow and terrible rain, or having splendid weather. But in any case, we're happy that this is being televised so folks can visit the presentation at their leisure. I am going to try to just highlight the key takeaways from a rather comprehensive and detailed housing needs assessment. And I'm going to ask everybody to hold any questions or comments to the end of the presentation. We are on a very tight agenda this evening. We want to move things forward, and we particularly want to allocate enough time to hear from you folks. That's really the main purpose of this meeting tonight, for all of you to weigh in on what should be the town's housing priorities. Oops, where's the, here it is. So tonight, I'm going to go through also with some kind of basic definitions. We are preparing this housing plan as part of housing production, which is basically a subset of the Chapter 40B regulations that were meant to provide greater local control over affordable housing development. The first step is to prepare a housing plan that meets all of the requirements included under this housing production plan regulations. And the first major requirement is to have this very detailed and comprehensive housing needs assessment, and that's what we're focusing on in this particular presentation. The plan also has to include annual housing production goals equivalent to 0.5% of the community's year-round housing stock. And for Falmouth, it's an ambitious 74 units per year. When the 2020 census figures are released, that year-round housing figure will increase, and therefore that 10% affordability threshold under 40B will increase, and also the annual housing production goal will go up as well to account for housing growth during this decade. The housing plan also has to include strategies that address the identified needs in the housing needs assessment. One of the benefits of putting a housing production plan together, besides the most important one, which is to have a local roadmap for how the town will be proactive in promoting affordable housing during the next 5 years, as the plan has a 5-year time period, is also to potentially get some protection against what the town might consider inappropriate or unwanted comprehensive permit applications. applications that town basically determines that they won't meet local housing needs. If the town can produce that and can produce 74 units per year based on the current annual housing production goal, it can submit that documentation to the state and get what's called certified, meaning for a period of a year, it has the ability to deny unwanted 40B applications without the developer's ability to appeal that decision. If it produces 1% of this year-round housing stock, it gets a 2-year, what some people refer to as a safe harbor. I should mention that in the last housing production plan in 2009, the town did actually achieve this certification. So just, a very basic slide on what is affordable housing. I can mention that there are various definitions. One is, according to HUD, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, whether it's for home ownership or rental, you're living in what might commonly be defined as not as unaffordable housing. The definition that we typically go by, and what I kind of refer to as the capital A affordable housing, is that which is defined under Chapter 40B comprehensive permit regulations. Those units that are included in what's called the subsidized housing inventory towards achieving that 10% affordability threshold under 40B, or that the annual housing production goal. In order for the units to count in the SHI or as affordable, they have to meet a number of requirements, including they have to be permanent units that are subsidized or approved by a subsidizing agency, either subsidized directly by a local, state, or federal resource, or approved through a subsidizing agency such as 40B applications. Before the developer can submit a comprehensive permit application to the ZBA, it has to get the go-ahead from one of several state agencies. It has to be deed restricted, and we're moving increasingly towards in perpetuity. It has to be affirmatively marketed, so people who live outside the community have some ability to learn about affordable housing opportunities here and potentially apply. I should mention, though, that many projects allow what's called local preference. So up to 70% of the units in any particular development can be reserved to those who either live or work in the community. The units have to be available to households earning at or below 80% of area median income, and that's for the Barnstable County area. Just to give you an idea, an example, a one-person household based on the 2018 HUD limits would have to earn no more than $48,300. If you're a three-person household, the maximum is $62,100. We're talking about working households. I just also want to add, the focus of housing production plans is to, work towards increasing a subsidized housing inventory and focusing on those capital A affordable units. This plan will also include strategies which will focus on a wider range of affordable housing needs. Sometimes we call the little a affordable units that might not meet all the requirements under 40B, but still serve a pressing local need. So what housing is actually affordable in Falmouth right now? So of the 14,870 year-round housing units, 959 or 6.45% are currently included in the town's subsidized housing inventory. However, there are more than another 300 units that are eligible for inclusion, and the town is working on getting all the documentation in place to send to DHCD to get those units encountered, which will then boost Falmouth's affordability threshold to 8.5%. And as I mentioned before, when the 2020 census figures are released, the 10% goal will increase, and so having a cushion at some point is always a good thing. As I mentioned, there's a lot of information in the housing needs assessment. I'm just going to give you a couple of major demographic trends, and I think no one in this room would be surprised, given that the demographic shifts that have been happening have largely been driven by the 65 and older age group. Also, there's been very limited year-round population growth after a population loss between 2000 and 2010. In 2000, the population was 32,660, and it decreased to 31,531 residents. And based on the 2016 census estimates, it's pretty much flattened out at 31,544. There has been some projected population growth. The Cape Cod Commission and Barnstable County Human Services Department put together or they funded a regional housing market analysis, which forecasts that the population will actually increase to 32,210 residents by 2025. I can say that the other demographic projections that, say, for example, from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the State Data Center at UMass's Donahue Institute project significant population declines. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. There have been declines in younger age groups and increases in older residents, also something that you folks are well aware of. Just to give you some specifics, though, between 2000 and 2016, those under the age of 18 decreased by 23%. Those 25 to 34 decreased by 8.7%. Those 35 to 44 decreased by 42%. However, those 65 and older increased by 27%. In fact, those 65 and older went from 22.5% of the population in 2000 to almost 30% by 2016, and pretty much the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the State Data Center project that population will increase to about 40% by 2030. And we also experienced increases in smaller households. For example, between 2000 and 2010, the number of households increased by 1.5% compared to a 3.5% population decline during that period. Clearly, besides smaller households, we're talking about more people living alone as well. So this chart shows the columns on the left in brown represent the population numbers from 1990, 2000, 2010 to 2016. The blue middle columns are total housing units, and the green ones on the right are seasonal housing units. And you can see how the population kind of went up and then it's kind of stabilized at about 31,500 residents. And I think what's notable is that between 2000 and 2016, the total number of housing units increased by 1,921 units, while the seasonal units increased by 2,116 units. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the seasonal units are are actually eating into eroding some of the year-round housing units in town. This chart talks about the changes in age distribution. If I can kind of just, so you see, whoa, I kind of have to take this with me. So, oh God, the laser was working before, not working now. But you can see how this is the under 18 category, then it's 18 to 24, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and then over 65. And you can see how there's a net decrease to almost all the population cohorts below 55, with the exception of a surprising increase in the 18 to 24 of age group. Albeit small, they are increasing somewhat, which was kind of surprising. But the 55 plus 64, you start seeing a small net increase, and then the numbers and the increases in the over 65 is kind of clearly shown in this chart. So we also did some analysis of economic trends, and most notably found that the town has relatively high incomes. The median income for Falmouth, based on 2016 census estimates, was $68,444, compared to county at $55,294 and the state at $63,961. But there are growing income disparities. For example, while the year-round median was $68,444, through a survey of second home owners, the findings included that on the Upper Cape, 68% of these owners had incomes over $100,000 compared to 31% for Falmouth, and 46%, almost half, had incomes of over $200,000. Also disparities by tenure. Homeowners' median income, based again on the 2016 census estimates, was $79,761, and for renters it was $35,949. There have also been some recent increases in poverty. While poverty is relatively low in Falmouth at 6.7%, say compared to the state at 11.4%, or the county at 8.2%, it still involves 2,113 individuals who are really struggling to stay in the community. It increased slightly for families, for all residents and individuals, families and children. It only decreased a bit for those 65 years of age and older. And then we have based on a number of data sources, somewhat expanding labor force, obviously with some significant seasonal shifts. And this chart shows the kind of net declines in all age categories below $75,000, and then some increase in the $75,000 to $100,000 range, and major increases in the numbers of folks earning over $100,000, not for year-round residents. So this chart shows the gaps between the median household income, which is the lower line, versus the median home values for a single-family home. And this is all based on census information. So you see a major shift, see if this works, a major shift that happens right at 2000, and you get this big uptake. There's been some slacking off in this, based on census information, to a median of 378,200. But the most recent information that we have on median values is actually $400,000. So this kind of low, this line, it actually is not as extremely declining. So this is, you see how the affordability gap really does kind of take off. So we get to housing. Falmouth has experienced somewhat slower housing growth. For example, the growth of number of units between 2000 and 2016 was 9.6%, or about 1,900 units, while it was 10.4% between just the decade of 1990 and 2000, with an additional 1,887 units. Should mention also, there was a loss of 231 owner-occupied units and 61 rental-occupied units between 2000 and 2016, despite an increase of 1,921 units during that period. Certainly, the year-round housing stock has been eroding somewhat. The town is experiencing significant demolition rebuild activity. For example, between 2010 and 2013, the percent of units that involved demo replacement ranged from 50% to 100%. We're currently working with the building department to update this information. We'll have in the housing needs assessment and the plan a more up-to-date figure on what the actual average tear down is per year. The town has, not a surprise, predominance of owner occupancy at 77.5% based on census estimates in 2016, about the same as the level was in 2000. And a predominance of single-family detached homes at 86%, which is down only slightly from about 87% in 2000. 35% of the housing stock involves seasonal units or second homes. Growth of 38% of these units between 2000 and 2016 compared to a loss of 290 year-round units during that period. Prices remain high, as I mentioned. Median single house price was recently at $400,000, which, based on a number of assumptions, would be affordable to a household earning at least $85,250. And that's with 80% financing. The median condo price was $330,550, which require an income of about $80,500 to afford that particular unit. There have also been, and this is documented in a number of ways in the housing needs assessment, but there are substantial gaps between housing demand and supply and those widening affordability gaps. Calculated in one way that there was a deficit of 1,605 affordable owner-occupied units for those earning at or below 80% of area median income. Based on assessors' records, if you look at those who are overpaying on their housing, that deficit increases to 2,340 units. So those are based on people who are paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Looking at rental units, there was a gap of 1,394 rental units for those earning at or below 80% of AMI. One startling number was 659 households who are earning at or below 50% of area median income were spending more than half their income on housing, referred to as severe cost burdens. There still remains some affordability in the town's housing market, and we estimated that there were about 1,845 single-family homes and condos that were affordable to those earning at or below 80% of area median income. Many more condos than single-family homes, and this doesn't count any kind of issues relating to condition. Limited but pricey private rental housing stock. The 2016 census estimates suggest that the median gross rental was $1,129 dollars, which requires an income of over $52,000, which is significantly higher than the median renter housing income of that $35,949. Also, these units all include the subsidized units with subsidized rents. So this median figure looks a little bit more affordable than it actually is. And when you look at the listings that are available, market prices for rentals are significantly higher. Increasing cost burdens, and that's for those people who are spending more than 30% of income on housing, includes 35% of all households, including 69% of all those earning at or below 80% of area median income. And 2,364, or about 17.4% of all households were spending more than half their income on housing. Which is significant. Based on a number of indicators of need, we went through an exercise of identifying priority housing needs, and came up with that rental units were the top need to offer more affordable housing choice. About needing permanent year-round housing for the community's most vulnerable residents and workforce, provide greater opportunities to build at some scale and leverage other sources of financing. Most state financing is directed to rentals. So if the town wants to leverage its limited money, we're talking about rentals. And we're also, there are a number of reasons additionally that included in the housing needs assessment that suggest that, that rental housing is more conducive to larger scale. We have 74 units per year, our housing production goals. That's an important consideration. Nevertheless, homeownership is still a priority in the community. A need to attract and retain workforce and families and provide options for downsizing. Most homeownership projects are smaller in scale, and most also involve almost exclusively local resources. We actually were talking about a potential split between 85% of the units for rentals versus 15% for homeownership. Also importantly, we need to focus some attention on people with disabilities and special needs. 14.2% of residents claimed a disability, which is likely to increase given the aging of the population, suggesting greater need for home modifications and or supportive services. We, as a goal, talked about at least 20% of the units in housing that's designated for seniors or single individuals being handicapped, accessible, barrier-free, or having some type of support services. 10% for family units. So, next step. We're going to complete the draft housing production plan, including housing production goals and strategies. And the work we do here tonight is really, really important input into what package of strategies ends up in the plan. And you'll see from breakout group instructions, so we're going to be focusing quite a bit on actual actions that should become the town's priorities. We're going to hold another public forum to present the draft and get feedback. Both the planning board and the board of selectmen have to approve the plan before we can submit it to the state. And then we submitted DHCD. They can take no longer than 90 days to review the plan. And lately, a couple years ago, 90 days, you almost could tell when you're going to get the letter. Now, they are moving much more quickly. So it shouldn't take nearly as long. And we will be posting this document on the town's website, so we ask people to review it, and the website includes some other housing materials that also deserve some attention. So with that, let's take a little bit of time and And if anybody has any questions or comments about the presentation, that would be very welcomed at this time.
Have you had a chance to take a look at what the major difference is between the UMass study that said we're going to decrease the population versus the Cape Cod Commission's?
Yeah.
What are the major factors there?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question, and we try to point that out in the plan. The state data center and the MAPC projections are kind of like the standard demographic process of looking at live births versus deaths and migration patterns, while the Cape Cod Commission analysis focused on Moody's economic forecasts. And what we've heard from the Cape Cod Commission also is that in a retirement community and in an area where so many people are coming from outside the community to look at just the typical formula, it usually does underrepresent kind of what the future holds. So it'll be interesting to see. It seems like the Cape Cod Commission report is a little optimistic about growth, but we'll see. That was a good question. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the 308 units that need documentation, where those are and what that process is?
Yes, I mean, I think a good many of the units, the documentation has already been submitted to the state, but has not kind of gotten the go-ahead to be included on the SHI. There are still a number of projects where accumulating information in order to send it off to the state. But hopefully, I mean, that's a big boom, 308 units. Hopefully sooner instead of later, yeah.
Are those units occupied?
No, not necessarily. Some are, but most of them are actually, they've been permitted, but they haven't, construction hasn't been completed. But it's like, for example, comp permit, you can get those on the SHI as soon as the comp permit is issued. So there's been a little bit of a backlog. Yeah.
Hi, you gave us a lot of
Hi.
data that obviously informs the recommendations. I was wondering if you could sort of succinctly summarize how you get from the data to your priority recommendation of rental housing as being the top priority.
Well, in the analysis at the end on priority housing needs, we kind of list a number of considerations for rental housing. One being that it's more amenable to housing the most vulnerable residents in the area who are really struggling. Not that there aren't a lot of people above income levels, but rental housing tends to go towards lower income thresholds. And we know that's where the greatest cost burdens are, as documented in the plan. The other thing is that rental units turn over more often, so there's, in general, over time, more beneficiaries. Almost all state subsidies are for rental housing. So if you're going to leverage your limited resources, rental housing is really where it's at. Gosh, there are a number of other considerations that we also, rental housing tends to provide kind of a range of smaller units for increasingly number of smaller households. It's easier to kind of wrap around some support services in rental housing and do some case management. That it also, let's see. Anyway, there's some additional information in there. And we also, we're talking about long waits at subsidized units. There are whole indicators of need too. It's the thing about ownership too, it's very hard to qualify existing owners for affordable housing based on caps of assets. So if you're in a community with rising housing market where people are, getting significant amounts of equity in their housing, it is hard to move them to home ownership based on the caps. However, you can more easily qualify them if they make the income for rental housing, because you only take like less than 1% of all their financial assets or any equity, and then you add it to their income. And if they're still under the maximum income limits, you can get them into rental housing. So I think those are some of the considerations. Also, once again, if you have a housing production goal of 74 units, it's very hard to make ownership work at scale as opposed to rental housing. And most of the projects that we do in town, which are really important, Habitat for Humanity, the Housing Trust, providing important workforce housing, you don't see large number of units in any particular project. And those projects are almost completely reliant on CPA or the Affordable Housing Fund, as opposed to being able to go out for other state funding. So I hope, in a nutshell, that's how we came up with that. Anything else? One more.
I'm a board member of the Falmouth Economic Development Corporation, and one of the things that we try to do is attract new employment to our community. Will we be looking at whether or not the development of affordable housing helps support job growth?
Housing in general, housing development in general is an economic engine in any community. It provides jobs, and on the Cape, construction is a big component of the economic base. And when you're talking about widening affordability gaps, having workforce units makes so much sense, and you can't easily do that without subsidizing market, the current, based on the market prices being so high. Very few people, it's harder and harder for people to afford it. Okay, last one.
Okay. Is there any consideration where they're going to locate all of this housing?
Good segue, because that's what we're going to talk about, and we break out into groups. And that's one of the questions we want everybody to address. So where you think are the best locations for new housing development. So we're going to break out into groups. And I want everybody, except for the Affordable Housing Committee, to kind of just count out. Did you count how many people? I'm tethered. You know how many people? 35? So let's break out into, what do you think, 35 people? We want to do like 6, 7 people, 7. Let's do 5 groups. All right, so we're going to count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember your number, and then we'll shepherd you into the other rooms, and we'll break out into groups, and with instructions, go through kind of a program tonight to get your input. So 1, you're 2, 3, 4, you're at 5, 6.
No, I guess that would have
6. I would have kept counting, yeah. Okay, 1, 2, 3, Karen, 4, 5, 6, 5. I did it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. You're not, no, 1. Okay. So 1, why don't you just go on a 5? No, go on the 1s. So everybody remember your number, take your belongings, because another group will be coming in. Quickly grab any food that you'd like, and we're going to bring you into this other room.